Hey everybody, it's ECAP here, and in this video we have my Retribution Paladin PvE DPS guide for patch 10.2. As always, at the top here, a couple disclaimers. Number one disclaimer, we do make this video with every type of player in mind. I try to make this video with an experienced and good player in mind, as well as a new player. So sometimes I'll say something in a very simple way, and that's because I want to convey it in that way. And sometimes I'll say something in a more sweaty way, and that's because I'm trying to convey it in that way. Again, I try to make this video for everybody, and I do my best trying to split that gap. It's not always easy. I don't always succeed. Another disclaimer is, this is based off of simulations mostly because the raid tier is not open yet. And of course, with anything I say, the best thing you could do is to simulate your character. But I realize, especially for the newer players or the less hardcore players, you might not want to simulate your character. And I'm going to try to keep you in mind as well throughout this video and throughout this guide. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, up first, we're going to be talking about the Retribution Paladin opener, Retribution Paladin priority as far as damage for single target and multi-target. You can see I have Wowhead opened up here, and why is that? I always do this on all my videos because it's for full transparency or whatever. I could, give you the same line and maybe be like, well, I do this instead of this. But I think it's important to point this out because specifically the Wowhead guide writer Bolas, he also helps make the simulation stuff for Rep Paladin on, or he might do it all, I'm not sure, for Rep Paladin on raid bots or whatever. So it's important to know, how it's telling your character to operate in that way. And if you find, little things that you can do better on your own, that's great. You can go and you can make like a slight little change or whatever, because it works better for you and you're doing great DPS by doing that. That's fine. But yeah, this is basically the way that it's set up in the simulations. So I think it's important to go over that with people. So the Retribution Paladin opener, this is, basically, obviously there's we'll do the AO. It's pretty much the same thing, right? We'll just replace Final Reckoning with Execution Sentence. So we'll go over that. So we're going to start with Blade of Justice, and it normally doesn't matter. And we'll talk about this more with the tier set later on. But it normally doesn't matter what you start with, whether it's Judgment or Blade. But in this case, it actually is good to start with Blade of Justice because of the way the tier set works. And again, we'll get more on that. But you want to start with Blade of Justice into a Judgment, into your Execution Sentence, into Avenging Wrath, Hammer of Wrath, Templar's Verdict, Wake of Ashes, Hammer of Wrath, Templar's Verdict, Divine Toll, and then you continue on with the priority. Basically, you're just trying to pump as much damage into your Execution Sentence as possible in this case, right? Hammer of Wrath is still a very strong single target ability, even though it's not, everything in our kit anymore. It's still a very, very strong ability. So it's good to do there. So this also is assuming Blade of Justice. It looks like in his priority list, he has it still as Blade of Justice with the 2 Holy Power, which I believe we will be running Blade of Justice with two uses or whatever. So you might have to use it twice for this exact thing to work here. Let's look at Final Reckoning next. So it's basically the same thing, Final Reckoning, except for you're obviously... so for the opener, he doesn't have it as an AOE opener. Okay, so you're going to be using Divine Storm instead of Templar's Verdict here, but it's basically the same exact thing. You also do not have to use Hammer of Wrath here because it no longer cleaves at all. So if you have any ability up that cleaves, I would suggest using that. In your AOE build, your Judgment, Blade of Justice, stuff like that's going to cleave. And so Hammer of Wrath's not important on your AOE stuff at all, let alone your opener. So that would be the difference there, I would say. Let's go ahead and talk about the rotation priority. So we have tier 31 set bonus. I am going to be, just for the rest of this video, kind of another disclaimer, I guess. I'm going to be saying this in terms of that you have your tier 31 set bonus. Everyone should get this. We have the Catalyst. It's open week 1. Everyone should get their tier 31, by the time you're doing this. And so this is keeping that in mind. All of the information that I'm going to give for this whole video. So we're going to have Crusading Strikes selected for single target. Some people don't like Crusading Strikes. You might run Templar Strikes. That's going to switch up a little bit. I'm going to talk about Crusading Strikes because that is the highest DPS. Vanguard of Justice selected. Execution Sentence selected. One good thing about Red is there are a few different builds you can play that are within a couple thousand DPS of each other. So You do have the option of changing things if you want, but again, this is just how it's programmed in basically, so it's worth noting. So we have Avenging Wrath every time it's up. So what's important to note here is I see sometimes in people's logs and stuff, people will sit on their Avenging Wrath for whatever reason. You pretty much just want to send it on cooldown. Obviously, don't send it if there's literally nothing there to attack, but you want to be sending your Avenging Wrath on cooldown. It's a 1 minute cooldown the way we play right now without Crusade, and you want to be getting every single use in, especially during like a raid encounter. So even if you're only going to get half uptime on it, you still kind of want to send it. Unless especially unless you're not going to lose a use, right? Which is kind of hard to predict unless you know the exact fight length it's going to be. Like Rashok would be a good example of that. You kind of know, especially you're on your first kill, you're probably going to be right up against the timer on Rashok in the previous raid, and so you can kind of know the kill time there. So if you don't know your kill time, then you just want to send it every time. If you know the kill time and you're not going to waste a use, then you could, delay it a little bit once or something. But you want to get all your uses in of your Avenging Wrath. That's why it's the #1 priority. Execution Sentence, of course. That's going to be like your main damage ability. Well, Templar's Verdict. And so this says with 3 Holy Power or 5 Holy Power or Echoes of Wrath buff. That's again from the tier set. We'll talk more about the tier set later on, but it's pretty much standard stuff here. So your Spender, Wake of Ashes, when you're not wasting Holy Power, it gives you 3 Holy Power, so don't use it when you have 3 or 4 or 5, typically. Blade of Justice, if Expurgation isn't applied. Again, this is because of the tier set bonus, so Blade of Justice is a very high priority ability. We then have Divine Toll, Judgment, Hammer of Wrath. If the target is above 20% health, or if you have 3 or less Holy Power, Blade of Justice, and then Templar's Verdict. When the target's below 20% health, it's actually a little bit more important, so maybe that should go, maybe there should be a little thing for it there, but I guess it's probably about in the same spot either way, so I guess that's not really a big issue. I've just noticed, some of the stuff might not be fully updated on here. So for AoE, it's pretty much the same thing, right? Same exact thing. We're going to make sure our Blade of Justice burns up. We're just going to Divine Storm into our Echoes of Wrath and Divine Storm instead of Templar's Verdict. And Hammer of Wrath is even less important. It's pretty much just your filler ability in this case. And this is with Crusading Strikes taken. Without it, which is a build that I'm going to show you when we do talents, we have Crusader Strike, and it's just very towards the bottom. 2 charges. 1 charge Crusader Strike is below Hammer of Wrath. However, in my build, it might even be better to do a 1 charge Crusader Strike over Hammer of Wrath. So I don't want to confuse everybody, but this is how it's set up. The TLDR for this would be we're spending efficiently up to 5 Holy Power, and we will break down exactly how the tier set works when we get to the tier set section. So hopefully, as long as you're doing the tier set thing right, and then you're not building over 5 Holy Power and everything like that, you should be fine. It's not a huge deal, especially with this particular tier set. So that's it for this. Next up, we will do stats. Okay, now for stats. So this is something people always ask about, of course. It's not really the most relevant thing, but especially more casual or new players or whatever ask about stats a lot. So it's important to talk about, in my opinion. Obviously, the best way to know your stats is to simulate your character and just the piece of gear that you want to upgrade and see if it's better. Because sometimes the stats on it might not matter if it just is giving you a lot more primary stat. So generally speaking, it's going to be primary stat, which is strength, and then it's going to be haste, especially if you're playing Crusader Strike auto attack. This ability right here, which we'll talk about in talents, that's the best of them, even though it's very close, right? Especially if you have Wind Fury available to you, Crusading Strike auto attack loses some of its value, but it's still probably like the best thing. So again, primary stat, then haste. And then everything else is kind of pretty equal, honestly. And so what I would say is, so it's all going to depend on your item level and what your stats are. Basically, once you get crit, mastery, and verse to 20% and above, they're all very, very close to each other at that point. So generally speaking, if you're not going to simulate your character, let's say you have a lot of haste because that's your #1 thing. You want to have, if you have 23 crit, you want to have 23 mastery, 23 verse. That's not going to be exact, but that is kind of a generality way to look at it, and it actually does kind of work that way within a very small margin, honestly. So it is very safe. If you're not, basically, if you're not going to simulate your character, that means that you're probably fine being off a little bit on the margins. And so if you're fine with that, then basically once your crit, mastery, and verse are over 20, I would say just try to scale them evenly and just keep stacking haste. At some point, I'm sure we lose value on haste, but haven't quite seen that yet. But maybe at the end of the patch we will see that or something. But haste is really good, especially again because of Crusader Strike auto attack. If you're opting to play Templar Strikes, haste is not going to have quite as much value for you. It's still going to be good for you, don't get me wrong, but it might lose a little bit of value for you there, and verse might gain a little bit of value for you. That's something that you'd have to look into yourself for your character, though. So yeah, I think that's it on stats. Obviously, avoidance and secondary stat, or like the tertiaries, are good as well. But yeah, I think that's it on stats. We'll move on to the next topic. All right, next up is talents. For talents, we're going to start in our raid build, and then we're going to look at a couple different Mythic Plus options that are available to you. Now, on the Paladin side, let's see what's all blocked here. So just the bottom left stuff's blocked. That's going to be of Dusk and Dawn. You'll want to take that. And you're going to want to take Seal of Order, which is above the top right of my camera. Seal of Order and of Dusk and Dawn, you'll always want to take those. So even though you can't see them, you'll always want to take those. I can also try to put these builds into the info down below. I know sometimes it hasn't worked in the past, but I'll at least try to put that down there. So for this side, on raid build, again, it's not super important. You're going to change this up based on the fight. A lot of fights are going to want to have Blessing of Sacrifice and stuff like that. Just depends on the fight. For damage things, which is mostly what we're talking about here, what you're really going to want to focus on is down here at the bottom. And you're kind of going to make like this little house thing here, and you're just going to skip Divine Purpose. So you're going to grab, well, Unbreakable Spirit's not damage, but that's like the tip of the house. Then you're going to grab Seal of Might, and then down to the left and get those two. And you're going to grab Seal of Alacrity, go down to the right and get those two down there. And you want Divine Toll, and you want Divine Resonance. And so that's going to be what you're going to want to have these damage abilities in raid on pretty much every fight. Maybe that'll change for the council fight isn't, they're not all stacked. So I think this is probably generally going to be how you're going to set this up at the bottom for all the raid fights. I can't really think of one that has enough sustained AoE to change that. So now let's move over to the ret side, which is more pertinent. This is actually going to be the same build from last season. So if you're bored of that, I'm sorry. So we're going to do the things at the top. We're going to do Improved Blade of Justice. Blade of Justice have 2 charges. This goes good with Crusader Strike auto attack. It also just goes good with our tier set bonus as well. Expurg, you definitely want that. That's our tier set. Swift Justice, Templar's Verdict, or Final Verdict. I like Guided Prayer here. I think it's just really, really good. There was some argument at the beginning of the at the beginning of the expansion. I hope that's all put to bed by now, because this is really, really good. It's almost like a lay on hands. Especially, I don't know if it actually goes with healing hands, but it seems like it does, because it just heals you up all the way. We're gonna have Art of War here, so your auto attacks have a chance to reset the cooldown of Blade of Justice, which is really good. Then we're going to go over here, Jurisdiction. We're going to skip one. Shield of Vengeance. We're going to take Vanguard's Momentum for our Hammer of Wrath. We're going to take Zealot's Fervor, which is pretty much mandatory for Crusading Strikes over here. We're going to take Rush of Light for some haste. We're going to take Boundless Judgment. We're going to take Crusading Strikes, Divine Wrath, Consecrated Blade to put down free consecrations, and then we're going to take Empyrean Legacy as well. We're going to do Vanguard of Justice to make our spender hit more. We're going to take Avenging Wrath Might. There might be at least one instance in raid where we take Crusade. I'll make a video about that separately if that ends up being the case. But for now, in raid build, you're safe just going on taking Might, just like last season. And then again, we're just going to fill out the left side here, bottom 3 on the left. We're going to fill out almost everything in the middle, everything except for Divine Auxiliary. We can skip that. And we're going to sneak over here and grab Penitence on the right side. The reason why is because it just affects the execution sentence. This is the biggest reason. And that's obviously something that does good damage for us. So yeah, that's the general raid build. It's the same exact raid build as last season. So pretty boring when it comes to that. It just so happens that the tier set kind of plays already how we were playing anyways, with improved Blade of Justice. So not much to change there. Let's move to the Mythic Plus side. First, let's talk about, I have Mythic Plus boss damage and Mythic Plus AOE. So let's talk about the boss damage one first. So this one's going to be a little bit more ethical. This one's going to be a little bit more probably better for your group. Obviously on this side, you're going to take what you need for whatever dungeon you're doing, whatever week it is. If you need cleanse, you take cleanse. If you need blending light, you take blending light. If you need turn evil, you take turn evil. That's all up to you. You have to know what your dungeon is asking of you. Down here, same exact thing as on the raid build. We're just going to skip Divine Purpose. These are our damaging talents. Make sure you take them. And then over here, we have more of an AoE build with a little bit of single target baked in, because we don't want to be completely worthless on bosses, although that can perhaps lead us to doing more damage. So we have the same thing as the raid build. Let's point out some differences here. We do have Tempest of the Lightbringer, makes our Divine Storm better. We get rid of Vanguard's Momentum, and we're not taking Sanctify for this build. We're taking Zealot's Fervor, again, because of Crusading Strikes. So that's still the same. Is there any other differences? Or we're going to take Blade of Vengeance instead of Empyrean Legacy here. We're not going to take Vanguard of Justice because it's just the way it works out for AoE. We actually do not need this. So we can actually skip Vanguard of Justice. Venging Wrath Might still. Blessed Champion to make us do a little bit more cleave. And then we're going to take everything on the right side. We're going to take to Final Reckoning. Then we're not going to take the bottom three things over here. So we are going to take Abjuration and Blades of Light, but we're not going to take these. We're not going to take Arbiter. We're not going to take Executioner's Will, and we're not going to take Divine Auxiliary. And so again, this is very similar to the Mythic Plus build from last season. I don't know if there's really any change, except for some people might have been running Vanguard of Justice. I'm not sure what people were running at the very end of the season, because I stopped doing Mythic Plus pretty early in the season, if I'm being completely honest. But basically, the only difference from my original build was basically getting rid of Vanguard of Justice. So yeah, pretty standard stuff here. Again, if you played Ret last season, this shouldn't be too big of a shocker for you. I do want to show you though, so if you do not care about boss damage, right? So Ret loses a lot of boss damage when they spec into AoE at all, unfortunately. So there are times where I think it's okay, especially if your group needs it, right? To completely double down and go full on AoE. And we'll talk about that here. So this might have you, well, likely will, if you execute properly, will likely have you do more overall damage at the end of the dungeon, but you'll probably be really, really, really low on the bosses, even lower than normal. And so let's talk about this build. So this build is basically takes the old AoE style and says we're just going to keep AoE, and we don't care that we have different talents now. We don't care that we can do a little bit of single target with our AoE. We're just going to focus on AoE. And so on this left side here, on the Paladin side, we're actually going to take Divine Purpose. We're going to get out of Vengeful Wrath, and we're going to get out of 1 point of the Seal of the Crusader. And we're actually going to put 1 point into Incandescence. It's not a very good talent, but it's something. So we're going to take that there. Now, the reason being because in AoE situations, we talked about it on the priority list, we're basically not going to use our Hammer of Wrath unless we have to on AoE situations. And so we're not going to worry about that because we're going to focus on our overall damage for this particular build. Again, I'm not advocating using this. I'm just saying that it's a good build for straight AoE. When we look at the differences, again, on this side, right, because we're going through all these talents, let's look at the differences. So we have Tempest of Lightbringer. That's the same as our other one. We're actually going to take Sanctify. We're not, which makes our Consecration do more damage. We're going to drop Zealot's Fervor because we're also dropping Crusading Strikes. We're going to actually play with just OG Crusading Strike or Crusader Strike for this, just to kind of free up some talents. And then the other difference is, so we're taking Sanctify. We're also going to take Empyrean Power. So earlier in the priority list, if you're playing a build like this, you literally don't want to use Hammer of Wrath at all, except for on bosses, right? Because even your Crusader Strike could possibly trigger your Empyrean Power. And so then that's another free AoE, right? And so that makes it the better thing. Everything at the bottom is going to be the same, but we're basically subbing out Zealot's Fervor for Sanctify, and we're subbing out Crusading Strikes for Imperium Power, and we're subbing out some stuff at the bottom right for Divine Purpose and just grabbing Incandescence. Again, your group's going to be mad at you if you're doing terrible boss damage and they don't know this, but if you're in a group of friends and you're like, hey, I'm going to go full AoE here, then this would be the build you'd want to play for that. Again, I'm not advocating it. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's healthy to play this way, but it will likely, especially on fortified weeks, it will likely net you more damage. So there you have that. So those are 3 possible builds for you. Again, I'll try to put them down below. And next, we will move on to crafted gear and embellishments. Okay, let's talk about crafted gear and embellishments. So for raid, it's really simple. It's you can just use 2 Shadow Flame patches as of now. Obviously, a big thing was going to be Spore Cloak. Spore Cloak got nerfed really, really badly. 2 Shadow Flame patches is going to be good for raid. If you have Frostfire Belt and you want to use Frostfire Belt, it's not that big of a loss. It's not that big of a deal. You could simulate it, of course, if you want to simulate, but I would say all 3 of those are pretty fine to use if you want to. But 2 Shadow Flame patches are probably going to net you the most damage in raid. In Mythic Plus, Shadow Flame patch and then the Frostfire legs. So the Frostfire so there's a Frostfire belt, which is single target. Frostfire legs are basically a multi-target embellishment that increases your haste when you hit more targets and stuff like that. So, you know, it's always been pretty much the best Mythic Plus one. Again, and that's just, it's going to help your AoE out, right? That's the main thing for that. As far as crafted gear goes, crafted gear is not as powerful as it was. Not quite. I think it goes up to 486. Whereas your Mythic gear will go up to 489 if you have that available to you. If you're playing in like the Rin Crest level, then, you know, it'll just be, you know, 3 eye levels lower than Heroic instead. Would be that level. So it's within 3 item levels, but it's not like you like right now I have just so many things crafted. I have the boots crafted as well. So 3, 4, 5, 6. How many things did I have crafted? I think I had 6 crafted pieces on, and so it's not going to be quite that crazy likely, but you can still fill in pieces with crafted gear until you get an upgrade, right? So crafted gear is still good, and you can use it as a temporary thing until you get a full upgrade, but yeah, it's not quite as powerful. You'll want to put the items, since we want 2 embellishments on, right? You'll want to put, like, let's say you're doing 2 Shadow Flame patches, you're going to put them on like your bracers and your belt because they don't have a lot of stats. So if they are a little bit lower item level, it doesn't matter. You're going to have 2 items that are lower item level because you do want the embellishments. So that's unfortunate, but belt and bracers are pretty good options there. As far as putting your embellishments on, obviously for Mythic Plus, you're going to have to put on your legs if you want the absolute best embellishment, which loses you some stats. But so maybe like legs and bracers or whatever, if you're going to run that. Or you could decide, well, I want the extra stamina, I want the extra whatever, so I'm just not going to use the legs. Then you could just do the same thing as the raid people do. So very similar to last year, very similar, you know. Not big changes. The big change is that crafted gear is just not like the absolute best possible thing, and all your slots are crafted gear. You know, they'll still be, you'll probably be using a lot of crafted gear until you get upgrades for your crafted gear. All right, let's talk about tier sets next. I have this pulled up on Wowhead because they're not in the game yet, and I didn't feel like logging on the PTR just to show the tier sets real quick. So we just pulled up the thing on Wowhead here just so we can see the bonus. So let's go ahead and read what it does exactly, right? So in case you don't know what it does, 2-set expurgation lasts an additional 3 seconds and deals 30% increased damage. Casting Judgment or Divine Toll, which is Judgment, on a target with expurg causes Wrathful Sanction, damaging the target for damage, holy damage, and resonating holy damage up to 4 nearby enemies. So it does, so judging the target with expurg, burn on it, does some damage. 4-set Wrathful Sanction grants you Echoes of Wrath. So that damage ability grants you a buff, Echoes of Wrath, causing your next Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm spender to deal damage a second time for 25% effectiveness. this effect does not consume judgment. So it does not use the extra judgment damage or whatever from your judgment ability. And that's actually to prevent you from using the High Lord's Judgment, where you could stack a lot of them, and then you could just have it use that and then get extra damage. Basically, the damage would have been really high, and they would have had to tune down the tier set anyways. So that's just kind of how they solved that, if anyone cares. So that's what it does. It's just kind of a 3-step process. You want to burn the thing, you want to judge the thing, and then you want to spend before you judge the thing again, so you consume your Echoes buff, right? And so that's generally just kind of how it works. The biggest change is we're losing Hammer of Wrath as our focal point from last tier, and Expurgation is our focal point this tier. So our Blade of Justice ability, puts Expurgation, makes the target burn. Now that burns for more damage. It burns for longer. The burn, judging into it, does damage, which is good. And then you also, judging into it does damage. That gives you the buff. It makes your next spender. So essentially, you just don't want to judge into it and then judge again without using a spender, because you don't want to waste one of your Echoes of Wrath buffs. Because of the way the timings work on the ability cooldowns and stuff like that for judgment and everything, for the most part, you can just press judgment on cooldown and you won't have to worry about it as long as you're keeping your burn up on your expurg. I'm sure there'll be a weak aura that tracks that, and there probably already is, honestly. And if it barely needs tracked. There's a couple moments, especially during your opener, where you might let your expurg fall off because you got procs or something like that, and you want to use the more strong abilities. You just have to keep it in your mind to keep the burn going. But I can try to find a weak aura and link one. I don't think I'm going to use one, is why I don't have one already. Because I played around with it enough on the PTR that I think I kind of got it under control. But if you want a weak aura for it, I'm sure there is one. And I can even try to find one, even if I'm not going to use it. You want to keep the target burning, judge the target while it's burning. That's going to do damage. It's going to give you a buff. And then you're going to want to do a spender, whether that's Divine Storm for AoE or Templar's Verdict for single target. You're going to want to spend into that Echoes buff, get the extra damage, and then the target will still be burning. So you could, assuming that you did it shortly after the first burn, so then you could judge into that same burn. You don't have to reburn it. You just want to keep the burn up, keep your dot up. You can then judge again, spend again, and then just at that point you probably need to refresh your expurg or something like that, right? So you want to keep your burn up and then just kind of do that over and over again. It's not hard. It might sound a little bit intimidating, some of the wording and some of the stuff like that. It's actually really easy once you get the hang of it, and it's not punishing really, because very rarely are you not just pressing the ability anyways. Very rarely are you not pressing Blade of Justice anyways, and so automatically refreshing your burn. And very rarely would you ever have judgment up twice before you used a Templar's Verdict or a spender. So it's pretty natural. It's pretty easy. It's not a huge IQ type thing here. All right, next we're going to talk about trinkets. Trinkets for raid and trinkets for Mythic Plus. So I'm basing this off of simulations. I did some personal testing on the PTR, and I got a little bit of different results. I'm very curious to see how the trinket stuff shapes out. However, generally speaking, the trinkets that sim the best, I kind of also had as very good trinkets. It's just some of the ones that I had as very good do not sim very well. So I don't know. I would say either they were bugged on the PTR, or they're bugged on raid bots, right? On Simulation Craft or whatever. So I am curious to see how trinkets are going to shape out, but I'm just going to give you the ones that simulate the best and not my own personal theories here. And hopefully that ends up just being correct. If anything is majorly wrong with the trinkets, I will gladly update it, especially if it's I'm correct, right? Of course I want to update that. So even if I'm not correct and it's something else, I'll update it if these trinkets are wrong. Let's first talk about raid and single target trinkets. So the best one is this Cataclysmic Signet brand. It drops from Smolderon, and it's just very, very strong. This one is one that I also found strong. Now, it's mostly strong if your encounter lasts long enough. So it's kind of like Anvil from last year, where you have to keep pressing it, and then you get to 5 stacks, and you're doing a ton of damage. Kind of the same thing with Signet Brand. You want to be in a long fight. Once you're in a fight for like 4 or 5 minutes, this thing is really popping off. It got nerfed, but it's still really, really good even with getting nerfed. So this is an extremely powerful trinket. It's really good for raid progression. Now, when you're doing reclear later on and a boss fight only lasts like 3 minutes, it might be better to swap something on over it. But for progression purposes, any boss fight that lasts over 4 minutes is going to be really good. If you can stay in combat at Mythic Plus, it's fairly good in Mythic Plus too. It's just about if you can stay in combat. So like Spiteful Week, where you might stay in combat for like the entire dungeon, it can be very, very powerful there. But if you leave combat, it loses a lot of its power. So it's mostly a boss trinket for raid, and it's just really good. This is like your best in slot. This is what you want to go for, unless they nerf it into the ground or something like that. It's very, very, very good. The other one from the raid is Branch of Tormented Ancient, which just drops off the first boss. It's a very, very simple trinket, 2-minute 30-second cooldown. You just want to use this on cooldown. I mean, you could use it into your wings, I guess, if you wanted to, but it's just, you summon 4 roots, draw power, slowing you, but it pops right away. It deals Shadow Flame damage. It's just like a damage trinket, basically, a use damage trinket. Think of like Grapnel or something like that from the last raid. But this is a very solid trinket, and this was very solid when I tested it as well, so I'm not surprised that this is solid. The other one is actually from a dungeon. It's from, they don't have this up on there, so I have to go back to find it. Battle for Azeroth, Teldazar. Let's find trinkets. Resin's Gleaming Eye. So this trinket simulates very well. It's well for single target, and this is just strength with your damaging abilities have a chance to call a child of resin, like a dinosaur or whatever, to come do some damage, and it bleed damage or something like that. And it sims very well. I did not actually test this trinket to even know, because it wasn't on the vendor when I did my testing. So I am just going to trust the simulations here and go with that. Let's go ahead and talk about some Mythic Plus options. And those are just 3 options. Probably the 3 best simulating options. There's also another decent one from Raid. And yeah, if you ever have any specific questions, you don't have access to all this kind of stuff, you can ask me questions, and generally speaking, I try to get back to people. Sometimes people leave negative comments, so I know myself and probably other creators like sometimes will ignore comments or something, but I do try to get back to people who have genuine questions. As far as let's go talk about Mythic Plus trinkets now. Again, these are just simulation based, basically. Let's go to the raid Major Sill, and we need to find Council. And so Pip's Friendship Badge sims really well. It's strength and then gives you secondary stats just randomly, and I think it can proc more when you hit more targets. Maybe I think that might be how it works. Let me see. Your spell's abilities have a chance to trigger a random. I'm not sure if it works better with multi-target or not, but it sims well in multi-target, and this actually worked well for me in single target as well. So I'd be interested if this is one of the trinkets that's actually good for single target. I'd say this is probably just a generally good trinket to get if you can kill Council of Dreams. It's only the 4th boss in the raid, because it's like usable on single target, I would say, and then it's like good for AOE as well. And then for the other 2 trinkets that I'm going to give you here, let's go to Dawn of the Infinites, and we want the Mirror. So this is strength, gaze into the mirror. It's the Mirror of Tormented Tomorrows. This trinket's pretty good. And then I have to find the other trinket that's pretty good. It's from a dungeon. Let's go to, I believe it's in, I think it might be Throne of the Tides. Okay, so this other trinket does drop off of Throne of the Tides, but it's kind of like a newer thing that they put in the game. Or okay, so it was a dodge trinket, and they basically just changed the way it works. So I have it up here on Wowhead, and now it's strength for Rep Paladins, and then it's just like a chance to give you a bunch of mastery, basically. And so this trinket also simulates very well for AOE, so it's good for Mythic Plus, generally speaking. So we have that there. So that's the way the trinkets basically simulate. And if there's any changes to this because something's wrong, I will update it. I will happily gloat and say that I'm right if I'm right, and if not, that's fine too. We'll just go with the simulations. So let's go ahead and move on to consumables and enchants. So to start off, there is a helm enchant that's going to be in the game. It's like a new feature basically. It just gets powered up as the patch goes on. Essentially, it's like a way just to make us more powerful passively to nerf the raid and stuff like that. So you want to have your helm enchant, of course. I assume this is, I don't even know how you get it on the, because obviously in the PTR you just got it from the vendor. But this is going to be, we're going to have access to this helm enchant at some point. You're going to want to have the helm enchant, of course. And then for your, let's just go through every piece. For back, you're generally going to want avoidance on it. For chest, you're going to want waking stats. For bracers, you're going to want avoidance. For weapon, Sophic Devotion is going to be the best. For enchant your hands, there's a belt clasp you can put on your belt. For your legs, I like to go with the fierce armor for my legs. For feet, you have two choices, either speed or stamina, so Watcher's Loam or Plains Runner's Breeze or something like that. And then when it comes to your ring enchants, generally speaking, it's going to be haste. Now, if you get to like a ridiculous haste point, or one of your other stats gets ridiculously low, like let's say you were at like 10% mastery, right? Well, mastery might be the best thing to enchant your rings. So generally speaking, haste is just the safe thing to do there. But it could change, and if you want to simulate your character, you can figure that out fine. I think this is also a good time to mention gems as well. We kind of talked about that with stats. So for your main big gem or whatever, you want your primary stat with haste. Then you're just going to a combination of haste plus whatever is lowest for you, essentially. So I have a lot of haste verse on right now. I could swap out a couple haste verse for haste masteries to make it a little bit more evened out. But generally speaking, you just want to kind of, like I said, just use the same rules as we talked about in the stats portion, and just haste plus whatever's lowest you have, essentially, would be what I'd say to use for gems. As far as we go with, let's talk about just our consumables. So obviously get your primary stat food, and then potions and files. For potion, you're going to want to use your Elemental Potion of Ultimate Power. That's still going to be the best thing. There are other things you can use in Mythic or in Mythic Plus. There are other things you can use in Raid as well. This is just generally speaking. If you get this potion, you'll be fine. If you want to explore it further, you can explore it further into some of the other potions and when to use them. For example, you'd want to use even in Mythic Plus, you'd want to use your Ultimate Power probably on the boss, right? If you're min-maxing. But there might be a better potion to use on a big trash pack, just as an example. And I like to just use File of Tepid Versatility. Again, there's other arguments for other files. This one gives you more survivability as well, because versatility gives you more survivability. And so I like to use File of Tepid Versatility as my file for all scenarios. Again, you can look into that more. And then for your weapon, you can either use like a whetstone or whatever, or you can use a Howling Rune, which is what I suggest you use, which I believe gives you the haste. If I'm wrong, you do want to use the rune that gives you haste. I could just swap to my build here just to make sure that it's Howling Rune and I'm not saying the wrong thing. Yep, Howling Rune. And so Howling Rune, Tepid Versatility, Potion of Ultimate Power, and those are the things that I'm rocking personally. You can explore to min-max if you would like to do that, but not going to quite get that sweaty here in this guide. So yeah, that's going to be it for this one. We do have a legendary axe as well. I didn't mention the axe. We don't know anything about the axe as of me recording this. That's going to change in like 2 days probably. I imagine somebody's going to get it. Maybe not. Maybe it has to drop off of Mythic first, like the Evoker Legendary did. So maybe we won't know right away. But the legendary axe might change some things. And whatever that legendary axe changes, we will update with a video on its own. If the legendary axe has a use like the gavel does, right? Gavel, the first arbiter from the jailer. I made a good video that people seem to like about that, explaining exactly how to use that. And if that is the case with the axe, I will go over that with the axe as well. But if the axe changes anything about our gameplay, that will be updated. We just don't know anything about that yet. So hopefully I don't have to do too many updates to the guide. Hopefully most of it's correct. You know, it's all mostly based off simulations, so at least I'll have an excuse if it's wrong. It'll be, if anything's wrong or whatever, or not fully updated. But I don't mind doing a little bit of corrections and stuff, as long as I'm not like getting stuff way wrong because I didn't research it properly or whatever. So that's it for this one. Good luck to all the rep paladins. You know, I didn't mention this in the guide, but we're probably not going to be too high on the DPS charts this patch, I'd imagine, without some more substantial buffs. But that's where we are here. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel because it helps me out a lot. And other than that, everybody have a good one.